Welcome. This is David Boles, Human Meme. Today's topic, that was the week that was in bigotry. Hell's bells, what a week. I have 3 shining, slimy examples of bigotry, and none of them were instigated by me, but all 3 were dead-eye directed at me. I call this new unbridled bigotry the Trump effect, where any bad behavior is now unleashed onto the unwashed masses of us just to prove a rotten to the core point that any feeling is just, every hatred is verified, and every outburst is pre-warranted. This is the new world order under a Donald Trump mentality. Do you remember the recent Human Meme podcast called Busters, Beaner Hopping, and Foreign Rage? It was an entire podcast dedicated to the horribleness of community hate crimes reported in newspapers and other media over the years. And my podcast was my conflation of all those new and ancient hatreds and threads and how they weave together and what they meant for us in real time in this modern life. That podcast did well, popular, lots of listeners, excellent feedback. Then I noticed on the iTunes website for this Human Meme podcast that the title had been edited, censored really, to read Busters B asterisk 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 R dash hopping and foreign rage. I thought that fascinating. I checked, and my RSS feed and the propagation of that podcast title everywhere else was untouched. The title remained as I had originally written it, uncensored. But on the iTunes page proper, censored. Asterisks. I thought it was strange that Beaner was offensive to Apple, but not Busters. And I happened to mention that on Twitter, and all hell's bells broke loose as one person, who appeared to be a black woman based on her Twitter avatar, decided to go after me for being a racist. Now, I admit, I made 2 major errors in interacting with her on Twitter. Lessons in social media metrics and behaviors that I've previously shared before with you here in other podcasts. The first mistake I made was not noticing that she had retweeted my tweet, wondering about the censorship of Busters versus Beaner hopping, and she made some snotty comment about how I was so dumb not to understand why Beaner was offensive. Since she was taking the conversation to her timeline via a retweet and not being courteous and thoughtful and replying to my tweet on my timeline. Now, minor point. I sort of excuse my mistake because I use the new Twitter dashboard, and it can be sometimes hard to discern a reply from a retweet if you aren't paying careful attention. But I love the dashboard. Try it out yourself, dashboard.twitter.com, and see for yourself. So anyway, I replied to this woman that she'd missed my point. My point was not about Beaner being censored, but that Dotbusters was not. I guess Dotbusters was not offensive enough to get the asterisk star treatment from Apple. Well, now here's my second mistake, and that was even trying to engage her. But she had a verified account, and I thought she is likely reasonable on some level, and that perhaps she honestly misunderstood my tweet. But no, I quickly learned that even verified accounts on Twitter can be trolls and bigots too, just like some of the rest of the unwashed, unverified, tepid masses. So the conversation, if you can even call it that, dwindled down from there as she continued to call me a white man of privilege. She insulted my Columbia University Ivy League education. And she dragged on and on all afternoon, clearly not caring to even listen to the podcast or to try to understand how she'd completely missed the entire point of my original tweet. Then, for some reason, she told me the N-word would be slapped out of my mouth if I used it. And I privately marveled at her attempt to try to manipulate me and intimidate me into trying to use that terrible word. She had baited me into trying to put the N-word in my mouth just so she could slap it out again, even though I never said at any time or implied any such notion of employing that word. However, when she mentioned that, I did reply, and I said words belong to everyone, and for anyone to claim any phrase or word as unusable by someone or a group for any reason only gives power to the word and punishes everyone else as a victim by association. It is an interesting chill that sets in around you and others as one realizes that one is not allowed to speak certain words, or perhaps even think them, like Dotbusters and Beaner hopping, in a podcast confronting previously published terms and names and labels that were all published in major newspapers. To deny the conversation is to confirm the bigotry. To censor words because you don't like them, or because Apple doesn't like them, is to pump air into the real reasons behind racism. And words and definitions are not the trouble. The behavior is the problem. And blaming words, labels, what we choose to call things as being discriminatory and hate speech, is to actually encourage censorship because of feelings and the abandonment of any notion of free speech in the public square. In this Trump effect, we cannot talk about our differences and difficulties if only some people can use words and others cannot. How can we resolve problems if we can't speak the words we're talking about in conversation? Oh, and putting asterisks in a title to censor the content only really invites more clicks to find out what is being hidden. Good for me, not so good for the censor. Back to my bigoted tormentor. As soon as I came to realize I was only a grindstone for her sword of hatred, nothing I said mattered. only her self-righteous bleating was acceptable to her. It was like having a conversation with Donald Trump. All bluster, no facts from her. And I learned some people are just so angry that they actively go looking for a knife fight. I ended my involvement with her stream of insults by thanking her for the conversation. And remember, in a previous Human Meme podcast, we discussed how your enemies are your friends. And thanking her worked. She sent out one last blast and then blocked me. I returned the favor. I realize now I tricked myself with a presumption of reasonableness in a verified Twitter account. And, lesson learned, I will now do as I have always done and block the trolls right after the first insult is waved. And then I'll save the rest of my day from the bigoted bottom dwellers. Okay, so if that wasn't enough for you, here's part 2 of That Was the Week That Was in Bigotry, Hell's Bells edition. This bit of bigotry happened in person and not online. I was attending a deaf advocacy event with my deaf wife. I was told by one of the conference presenters that I was not welcome and that I had to leave because I was hearing. And my presence there was a violation of a safe space. Now that's a new one. The deaf discriminating against the hearing. Be wary of those who think they hold power. They hold power only in a clenched fist. It did not matter to that person that I know ASL, or that I teach ASL, and that I write books about deaf culture and learning ASL. The only thing that mattered was that I was not deaf. Ouch. The event was held in a public space on a state-sponsored community college campus, and frankly, it was a civil rights violation. You cannot kick people out of public events because of their gender, race, or their abilities. Civil rights are a growing emporium in the USA. The best, most recent example is one of the Women's Entrepreneurship Workshop, advertised as for women only. When a few men tried to attend and were pushed out, the men sued, and they won in court. It was illegal for them to be discriminated against because of their gender. Their civil rights were violated. And this civil rights thing is a whole new niche of lawyering now. Remember how, in a previous podcast, we discussed here in Human Meme about the slow disintegration of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and how lawyers have run out of people to sue to push for compliance? Well now, those same lawyers are taking up these exclusory meeting and conference matters and filing civil rights lawsuits, and yes, they're making money because they're winning. But they're also fighting to preserve a niche of human rights. And in the United States of America, the only way sometimes to get reliable results in a proper and structured fashion is to sue for damages. In America, we can no longer exclude people legally for specific reasons because of who they are and who they were born to be. Now, the way to advertise a women's entrepreneurship workshop is to name it just that, and then add, all are welcome. And what man, not looking to win a lawsuit, would accept such an invitation? except one who was willing and eager to learn and support the method and the idea of the teaching. And don't get me started on the straw man argument about safe spaces violations. Do a search, humanmeme.com, uchicago.edu is not a safe space. We've talked about it before right here in this podcast. And the safe spaces violation is invoked as a last resort to cover other human rights violations. My wife and I ended up leaving the conference to save our souls to fight another day. Sometimes battling in real time, in the now, is more defeatist than marking out the boundaries of the wrong later, and then attacking back appropriately with precision and grace from afar. And no, we're not looking for money. And I assure you, the fight is just beginning to be shot back at them. Now, for the third and final installment of That Was the Week That Was in Bigotry, Hell's Bells edition, we move all the way back to Twitter and that back alley abortion clinic where anything goes. Remember when we discussed that in a previous Human Meme podcast? I said something like Facebook is your grandmother's sitting room, while Twitter is the back alley abortion clinic where anything goes. Well, here's more proof of that. I had posted a tweet about sugar skulls and provided an example in an image. A sugar skull is part of the celebration for the Day of the Dead, Dia de Muertos, a popular meme of Mexican culture where the dead are remembered and celebrated in candy and mourning and storytelling. A woman on Twitter who came to me by replying, I didn't go after her, and she appeared to be East Asian Indian based on her avatar. And yes, I'm over-describing her because each part of the world has their own sort of referent for describing people in other bits of the world. Anyway, that woman said something about not liking the sugar skulls because she wants to celebrate living people. And I replied. She was on my timeline and not hers, so that was a boost. I replied that sugar skulls celebrate life by remembering the dead, and you become thankful you are alive. Well, she wasn't buying it. She came back several times to disparage Mexican culture and to go on to say how she didn't approve of it and didn't like how Day of the Dead looked or worked. And I then asked her about her Twitter avatar. Painted face, chains on her head, a pendant swinging as the third eye from her forehead, nose rings. And then I asked her how she would like it if someone judged her and her culture based only how she looked and dressed. She unfollowed me. In closing, I am reminded of something the great stage and screen director and producer and performer Mike Nichols taught me in graduate school. Mike said, "Life is a pendulum swinging into and out of poop." Well, Mike didn't actually say poop. He used the other word, but I don't want to get censored here or get an explicit tag on this podcast for using the S word. So poop it is. So, as Mike said, life is a pendulum swinging into and out of poop. And the trick, Mike Nichols said, in the living, is knowing which way the pendulum is swinging. Are you heading into the poop or swinging out of the poop? This week, we were into it. And now, as of this podcast, we're moving out. So this was the week that was in bigotry. Hell's Bells Edition. And never forget, the bigots always block you. The racists always unfollow. The trolls will forever find you. Thanks for listening. Be a human meme.